based on the 70s Tomb of Dracula Marvel comic book, came the 1980 Japanese animation horror film Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned. To give you a feel of the animation of this, it kind of felt like the Speed Racer cartoon He-Man and the G.I. Joe cartoon of the 1980s, that type of animation. It was almost like a reverse Bible Stories Hanna-Barbera production. I cannot believe the depths of how dark this film is when you see it. I highly recommend it. This is one of the darkest horror movies I've seen all year. Based off the Tomb of Dracula Marvel comic book, as you could see, they got the right look of Dracula, the cliched cape and cloak with the red inside and the fangs. Oh, I fucking love this movie. In that comic book, which is the same comic book that introduced the Blade character, there was only 70 issues of it from 1972 to 1979, and what it followed was John Harker's son, who was basically the Charles Xavier of the group of vampire hunters that tracks down Dracula in this series. And the story arc is from number 7 to number 50. Like I said, there were 70 issues. So, and the other characters of the Vampire Hunter clan are the Van Helsing's granddaughter and Dracula's descendant, who he had before when he was a human back 500 years ago. And that ancestry has lived on. But they play like a backseat. The real battle in this, and the real main character, you could say the anti-hero, is Dracula in this. And his battle with Satan. You cannot believe. Oh my god, just watch part 1 on YouTube, the opening, where the cult has the sacrificing seance in the opening. It's so dark, and they're holding it at a Boston old architecture church. A huge old church, great animation, like I was saying. And they have a flaming skull in that scene, and they have the cult priest give the seance where he's calling out the demon, and they're sacrificing some skank for Lucifer, and he's like, I beseech the Lord of Darkness to accept our sacrifice. Let me give you a picture of it. That's the cult right there doing this. And here goes another cover of the series. You can see all the covers on Google. There's 70 issues, and all of them are so awesome to look at. And so in that opening scene, they're doing the sacrifice, and instead of Lucifer getting the sacrifice, Dracula comes and he steals the woman. And he ends up falling for her, and this is some subplots where a lot of people call this movie shit and absolutely hate on it because of some inconsistent plot points and some oddball plot points, and it was obviously converted over from Japanese, so they weren't going in succession of a tellable story sometimes, and so the Blade character isn't in it. And the main vampire hunters take a back seat. And later on, the cult leader does a prayer for Satan. They go back to him. And Satan appears out of the flame. And he ends up looking like Lord Darkness from the Ridley Scott movie Legend. Let me see if I can find a picture of him coming up. Here goes one of Dracula. And, it's just such a great scene. There's so many great scenes in this, you wouldn't even believe it. Hold up, I found one. So they give the cliched devil look of the red body with the red horns. And the guy who plays him was like only 25 at the time. It was pretty dope. There's so many good and dark scenes. This is darker than many horror movies that I've even seen, and this is like a cartoon. And so they plot the revenge on Dracula. like so many lovers, like so many vampires before him, he falls in love with the girl instead of. And we learn the history of Dracula, that 500 years before this, he was. We learn the history of Dracula, that 500 years before this, he was like a warmonger. And he ended up obviously killing a lot of people in his lifetime when he was the human Count Dracula. And then obviously after he died, the devil came and condemned his body and used him as a cursed demon to collect souls from him, and obviously he became Dracula. That's the story that we know, because obviously that character became public domain. And so it's awesome that Marvel was able to do the comic book. And I fucking love so many moments in this, it's not even funny. And then they eventually have him. So the story is that he resurrects him, like I was saying, to be his satanic slave, which is perfect. And then he ends up stealing the woman that was intended for him, and then Satan's pissed off about that, so they end up getting revenge on him. And what plot they do is the cult ends up sending a raven with a message. Actually, that's the message right there, and that's the perfect picture. I was just going to a random one, and it ended up being the right one. And the cult's like, oh, we want to bless your baby and basically do a reverse communion and baptism for the Dark Lord and ask for Satan's protection. And the bitch is like, I think it's a joke. The cult's kind of cruel. And then Dracula's like, no, it'll be straight. This child needs protection. And Dracula ends up having a heart. And then they just end up doing a random club scene with some character who's also another. I guess Dracula's like the king of the vampires in that region, in the New England area, and they'll do like short subplots of like some random bitch at like a disco nightclub, and she like ends up biting them. Here's the bitch right here. She ends up killing someone random, and it has nothing to do with anything, and you don't even see her again. And then like, so Dracula ends up accepting the invitation to get his baby baptized by this satanic cult. And they end up doing Luciferian prayers in the opening, like I was saying. You gotta just watch the first 10 minutes. You're gonna want to watch the rest of this movie. And then it ends up being a trap. And they end up killing the baby, and it's a showdown between the cult priest, who they never give his name, so they just refer to him as the cult priest in credits, and Dracula, and the baby ends up getting killed. And then this goes on the outer reaches of what the fuck when the baby gets resurrected by God, like he's freaking Jesus or something, and he's resurrected for the sole purpose to strike down his father Dracula. But really all he ends up doing is just floating around and acting gay. Like literally completely worthless. And then the mom just turns into the Bella character from Twilight. And she just doesn't want him to kill Dracula. She doesn't care that he's evil. And we end up learning she had a history of being a skank. And she just joined the cult just to be a part of something. That's what they were saying. And then Dracula, and then it ends up being the showdown between the devil and Dracula. That scene's the second most, actually the third most, because the cult scenes are definitely the best. How the dark they go, and they actually do long prayers and seances praising Luciferian and calling out his different demon names based off the Marvel Mephisto character. And Dracula ends up being a villain to Spider-Man and other. They use this Dracula from the Marvel comic books as a villain to like Spider-Man and Captain America, as we know. And there goes a shot of like Van Helsing's granddaughter. And so the devil gets pissed and he takes away the freaking Dracula's powers because he's the one who obviously gave it to him. And then the skank, and then he tells him that the skank has powers, even though she was just a stupid slut groupie who had just ended up joining the cult just for like to be an attention whore, and she accepted to be Luciferian sacrifice. But she ends up falling in love with Dracula also after she learns that he's not Satan. So then Dracula ends up getting wandering around in the cemetery, and the other vampires ended up attacking them, and they're like half zombies. They come up out of the ground. Those shots are amazing. All the freaking animation is amazing. The reviews on it on websites say the animation is terrible. I just love that era, love that style. And then he ends up battling the leader, the new leader of the vampires on the sovereign ground in the cemetery, and ends up winning by like, you'll see he has a burn of the cross stained on his hand. Even though he lost his powers, he wouldn't have been burnt. And then and then like how I said, the vampire hunters play backseat. They're always like not even close to finding them until Harker, who's like the Xavier type, like I was saying, who's in the wheelchair, ends up showing up for the final dramatic scene at Dracula's castle, where he just somehow gets his powers back. This is where a lot of other people go anal on it. There's like only other one review on this on YouTube, and it's like a trio of geeks and dweebs who are just like, oh, this movie sucks. Oh, they're praying to Satan. They just don't appreciate the dark moments of the cult and the Luciferian They just don't respect the Luciferian powers and the strength of it and the dope Marvel character. I just love it. And the Dracula classic character, I'm so glad I was able to see this. And the power of the devil. It's great. I fucking loved it. I'm giving it an A+. So like I was saying at the end, where it's the confrontation, where the vampire hunters finally meet up with Dracula, and Harker ends up sacrificing his life like a noble old bastard, typical that you see in movie scripts. He ends up stabbing him with a silver stake, and then he blows up his wheelchair, and he ends up bringing down the house of Dracula. Even though they say they see Dracula's silhouette at the end of it, so he might still be alive. Fucking awesome. A+, like I was saying, 9.7. Could have even been better if he didn't have that little gay, mini-me, He-Man, gay man son of his who was just there for absolutely nothing. To just be floating around fairy style. This was JBM from VillainNews. That was pretty much all my thoughts on Dracula, Sovereign of the Damned, also known as like Dracula, the Emperor of Dracula or something stupid, or vampires. There's another Japanese title. I'm gonna put the movie link and whatever other links that I want to put in there in regards to this, and you could check out covers of this and of the comic book that it's based on from the Marvel 70 comic book, and check out my channel VillainNews on YouTube. And this was JBM. You could hate me now. I'm out.